So we've established that authenticity, self-honesty is very important,
necessary.
But it seems a sense of shame and a fear of wrongdoing, which the Buddha also says is, the guardians of the world.
Guardians of the world, yeah.
Why a sense of shame, fear of wrongdoing, and guilt? Is guilt the same? Or?
It can be, yeah, sure.
Because it's
because I think it probably would be on the same level, exactly. Yeah.
But why is a sense of shame a good thing?
Well, because it prevents you from doing bad, doing unwholesome, doing things based on sensuality. Because if you don't have that preventing you, initially there's nothing stopping you. So that's why it's good to have a sense of shame, even if you don't necessarily have wisdom or restraint in place. At least that sense of shame will keep you from becoming an animal, literally, in terms of your behavior. So that's why it's the guardian of the world. As the Buddha said, if there were no sense of shame, sons would be sleeping with mothers and sisters and fathers with daughters, and it would just be like animal realm full on. So there is that, just that, like, even for a completely unenlightened mind, the sense of shame at least is something that would. Now obviously you have the other extreme of, when people become religious and then they start to turn into this like a moral commandments and repression. But that's not anymore that sense of shame at all. Like, when you're ashamed of everything, even things they're not shameful. But it's this kind of natural sense of shame in regard to, like nudity or body exposure or like lewd, coarse things in general. So with that sense of shame, there is at least some kind of rules, so to speak, in the world on that natural level. Because otherwise, everybody would just be going with everybody in any way, with complete decline, mental decline.
But we have, most people, as a human being, you have an inherent sense of shame.
Yeah, exactly.
You feel when you're doing something wrong.
That's exactly what it is.
And you have to be honest.
It's that, if you're honest, if you're authentic and self-honest, that sense of shame, that's exactly what becomes, what reveals itself. I'm not talking about the fabricated, like, this is shameful, but it's really just kind of more like a hateful attitude when people turn into like that kind of morally judgmental and so on. That's more just coming out of ill will and repression. No, if you're authentic, then exactly, there are things that you don't necessarily want to do with others or being like known, which means then because you're authentic you wouldn't be doing it. You're not going to try to conceal it either. And in the same sense, the guilt for doing something wrong, then you realize instead of denying it, ignoring it, and it's like, don't hate yourself, and no, you accept the guilt as a result of what you've done carelessly. And then next time it will make you think twice, because you're not running away from the disagreeable feeling of the guilt. You're accepting it, and sometimes it can endure for days and then come back again and again and again for like years later. But each time it comes, each time you accept it.
But there's these thoughts where it's good to be guilt-free, no shame.
Well, that's true. It's good to be guilt-free, and the only way to be guilt-free is through fully accepting guilt and then going beyond it. Not by ignoring it or denying it. And that is exactly the case. People feel that inherent sense of shame, but they project it and blame society for it. I mean, yes, society has a lot to play in the degree of shaming, but there is that threshold which is the natural shame, and some people will have more of it, some people have less of it. Certain things, they will just make you uncomfortable, but then people find that a problem because it can be unpleasant, obviously, if it's preventing you from doing what you want to do, and then you blame society, you blame the culture, you rebel against it, you try to override it. But that's completely misplaced effort. The better effort is actually, no, there is a place for that natural degree of sense of shame in regard to doing things that are really not nice, literally. They're inappropriate. Because of that, and the fear of wrongdoing, that's why it's always bound together. I don't want to do it, it's just wrong.
Like stealing, lying.
Lying, cheating, just being basically acting like a just following your desires in the same manner an animal would, like without any reflection, or you see dogs. I mean, they get into a village, and they know they're most likely gonna be attacked and maybe seriously injured by all the other pack dogs. But they just saw either a female and lost perspective, or food and lost perspective, and they know how it's gonna end, but they just have no reflection over it to consider it. So they just go and eat, and while they eat, then they get attacked, and that's it. And then
they don't know
they
the
suffer the consequences. Exactly.
Yeah, they don't know about those consequences.
Yeah. They can't factor them in, because the mind doesn't possess the same powers of reflection as human mind does, and that's why they don't have the sense of shame. That's why you have a puppy and a mother, and it's all like, oh, that's my mother. But once it passes a certain age, and he starts responding to female hormones and adolescence and puberty, then he just starts seeing the mother as a female. It's not anymore seen as a mother, for as long as it's, the heat is going on and so on. There's no sense of shame. They don't perceive that. But for most people, they do have that recognition, and that sense of shame would be guarding going that way. For most, not always. People are different. Some people don't have any natural sense of shame.
How do you develop sense
Well,
of
by
shame?
becoming self-transparent. By keeping your desires in check, then you realize that with or without the sense of shame, you are the one responsible for saying yes to desires and following them through. Because it doesn't matter what thoughts your mind might be presenting in forms of desire, possibilities for things you want to do. That doesn't matter. What matters is you accepting to do it or not, and then following through and doing it or not. So that's self-honesty. Self-honesty, you don't blame society, you don't blame government, you don't blame your genes, or that's how I was born. Because even if all those things are in play, you, in the present moment, are always responsible for deciding.
Reflection about the consequences, reflection on the consequences.
Yeah, well, that can help, but not necessarily. It's like same, people try to give up some addiction, they can reflect on consequences, but when the addiction is present, they don't see consequences relevant on the same level as when the addiction is. But if you're self-honest, you realize you would be able to allow whatever pressing desire arises, you would be allowed it to arise, and have enough space to not give it in, be kind of hooked by it. But that takes that you have to start seeing benefit even in that initial restraint. If you don't, then there won't be enough there won't be enough ground for any proper development. Because without that restraint beforehand, you won't be able to allow desire to come close without you acting upon it. As soon as it starts coming, you'll be acting upon it. But the restraint will prevent it. Doesn't mean it's going to make things, it will make things nicer and easier and more peaceful later on. The mind grows out of it, grows from it. But until then, it's actually, it's going to reveal the pain, underlying pain, beneath the desire and the lack of restraint.